Hello everybody, this is DH Thorne here. This particular video is going to be the first in a series which I'm going to be calling something along the lines of Rationalizing Magick, and then some sort of other title. So this particular video is going to be Rationalizing Invocation / Evocation. And it's probably going to be the most popular of them because obviously people who are following me for whatever reason, the subjects of Invo / Evocation are the most interesting. So before I really get into rationalizing this and helping you do a better job of it, let me first begin by defining my own terms, because I think I use different terms than other people do because my education level in the occult is lackluster compared to most of the people that I'm contemporary with. I'm more of I'm like a beginner in one way and hyper advanced in another way. So forgive me if I use different terminology. So this is how I use them. For me, invocation is anything which causes a spiritual truth, a spiritual archetype, a spiritual presence to in some way become part of your awareness, internal awareness. So you feel that. So in other words, it's sort of like different levels of possession. So the most basic level of invocation is you feel a presence, you feel them touching you, you feel their presence, you feel them influencing you, but it doesn't go any further than that, and it may or may not, you know, have something in your environment happening, but you feel it inside you. You're allowing them to inspire you. Like that's the base level. Like, you know, King Paimon, inspire me to create a beautiful song for you. And you'll do a ritual and you'll feel his presence, and then you'll be inspired and you'll start making a song, and that's like basically the lowest level of invocation. Then it can go all the way up from that kind of inspired invocation to channeling and low levels of possession till eventually complete possession. So invocation is one spectrum. Then you have evocation, and I make the distinction because in means invo, like invo means internal, and evo means external. It means either creation in the environment or somehow it's external to your personal being. So evocation is when you call a spirit, you summon a spirit, you request a spirit come, and there is physical or some other environmental manifestation that's external to you. Now, in my personal experience, both usually happen at the same time. It's very rare that I get an environmental effect and not an internal effect. And it's very rare that I get an internal effect and nothing external at all whatsoever. But I will say, of the two, invocation's easier for me. I tend to feel the presence of the spirit in me. It's like my gift. It's one of the things I'm good at. And there's other things I'm good at, but it's one of the things I'm best at, is when I feel the spirit's inspiration come over me. And for certain spirits, full channeling or possession is easy, but I usually don't demonstrate that with anybody that I'm not intimate with in a friendly way. Like, I have to really be comfortable with you. Even paying me is not enough, you know, for me to go full on with that. But I will admit that there's times during live streams or during these videos where I am actually channeling or in some state of possession by a being that I work with. Some of you have noticed a slight difference in my personality that will come over me. Different characteristics and personality traits, mannerisms. Part of that is because I'm a bit of a chameleon empath, in that I don't feel what you feel. I'm not the type of empath where if you stub your toe, I go, ow. I'm the type of empath where if I observe you, I passively read you and I fully get what you're thinking. Like, I can study your face, your eyes, I don't even have to look at you. I feel your energy. I feel your higher self's truth coming through you, with very rare exceptions, of course. But I'm also a chameleon because of it. It's sort of like I have a natural talent for NLP, because when I'm around somebody, I tend to take on either their characteristics or I read what they need me to be, and I act that way. So you'll see when I'm hanging out with the Flesh Priest, I act one way. When I'm hanging out with E.A. Quetting, I act another way. When I'm with my wife, I'm yet another way. And I promise you we're all like that, but some people are more like that than others. So what will happen to me is, because I think of that a little bit, when the spiritual presences come over me, I really get a better connection. I get a really good tendency to literally just let them come through me, and that's what happens. Maybe I have a little bit of multiple personality disorder, who knows. All right, so it's one of the things I'm better at, is invocation, and evocation is something I'm also pretty good at. Evocation, though, is not so much a science as it is you do things and then hope you get a response. That doesn't mean that there isn't some rules to it or some things you have to do to encourage it that help. But I promise you, it can happen even if you just go, King Paimon, are you there? Like ghost hunting. Like you just sit there with like a spirit box or something, and you might get something, right? So you might not have to do anything for a spirit to be evoked into your environment or to change things. So invocation is an internal experience, evocation is external. Both usually happen at the same time, usually leaning one way or the other, sometimes fully. There's also times where you'll be fully possessed and your environment is fully possessed, and you have invocation and evocation happening at the maximum at all times. So that's the definitions that I use. So let's go on to rationalizing this a little bit, making it a little bit easier. Now, one of the things that comes up the most when I am out and about in public, so to speak, on social media, and people send me messages, I'm going to say 7 out of 10 times the messages I get from people who have questions rather than just they want to talk to me because they want to sell me something or something, is because they are having trouble with their Invo/evocation activity. They will sit down and they will do the ritual as written, either my ritual or someone else's in someone else's book or whatever it is, and they'll go through the steps step by step by step by step by step, and they'll do it perfectly to the point where I can see videos. Yeah, you did the ritual just fine. In fact, not only did you do it fine, I would say that you even followed my own rules for it. You had altered states, you did all the right things, but you still didn't get anything. So that's the most common problem that happens. People will come to me and say, Thorne, no matter what I do the ritual and I sit and I sit and I sit and nothing happens. I don't hear any voices. I don't see anything. The smoke's just curling around. It's nothing special. The incense goes out. I get bored. I get up. I close the ritual and I call it a day. And to me, this is kind of sad because the way that I understand these things, I have to actively try not to be inspired in a way. I have to be distracted. The current state of affairs in the world, with the quite obvious global New World Order trying to fuck the whole world with this, we won't even get into it because I know it's upsetting to everybody. But with everything that's obviously going on right now, a lot of my attention has been on that. I do a lot of just research, scrying, and of course, the dopamine hits of social media for watching videos about what's going on, news reports and all that stuff, has been utterly clogging my brain. It's one of the reasons why I did that sanctuary video a while ago. And so it's been kind of difficult for me to really get into that magical mindset that you need to be in. So I've kind of been buffered from having a lot of spiritual contact compared to what I was getting last year. But I still kind of have to actively try to block that part of me out to prevent myself from getting it constantly. There's almost always some kind of inspired imagery, thought, or concept that comes to me. Spirituality, metaphysics are just something that's constantly on my mind. I'm going to say, where they say like, all day men dream about sex or something, like every 6 seconds someone has a sexual thought. Well, for me, it's the other 5 seconds are pretty much constantly thoughts about metaphysics and the nature of experience in the universe and everything else. So it's pretty much all that I think about. It's all that I'm interested in, unless of course we're going through international crises and so on that might distract me, which is it's just an attachment I have, and it's something that I'm just dealing with. I'm not even working on it. It's just gonna live with it. So that's maybe the first thing I would suggest to you, is pay attention to what's an attachment that you have. What is preventing your mind from properly entering the altered states necessary to make the spiritual connection that you're looking for? Are you distracted? Is the issue, the reason you're calling the spirits, so pressing that you're so worried and pent up that you can't relax and get into the ritual? So for example, someone will come to me and say, Thorne, I did the ritual right. I contacted Asmodee. Maybe I offended him. I gave him his offering, but I didn't hear anything. And maybe this isn't real. Maybe it's all fake, or maybe I'm just not able to do it. Or, but I really need it to, because my girlfriend is leaving me, and I really need Asmodee to bring her back for me. And it's like, it's really hell on me, and I can't. Well, some of you are probably nodding your head already. That's obviously your problem, is that you're completely and utterly attached to the issue. And so your brain is really your mind, your soul, your character, your persona, your identity, your allegorical self is focused so much on the attachment that it has to the outcome of the ritual or the crisis that is requiring an outcome, that you're not really settling in and entering the altered states fully that you need to enter. That's number one. The number two thing I would talk about would be the altered states themselves. Every single version of spiritual contact, Invo/Evocation, that any culture has ever done throughout history, as far as my research shows, has always required or involved some level of altered state technique, whether that be one or more of dancing, chanting, psychedelics, entheogenic compounds, drunkenness. They always require something that causes altered states. For example, you might fast for a week, then you might dance around a bonfire wearing a wolf skin, eating fermented fruit or something, and dancing and dancing and dancing and dancing. So here you are on an empty stomach. Here you're already on the verge of sort of like a breakdown because you haven't eaten anything in like a whole week, and now you're dancing to exhaustion, and you have this rapturous state of, like the whirling dervishes get when they dance around and around and around, then they can start putting swords in their heads and shit. You get into this rapturous state of gnosis, and then you start having visions and weird experiences. And not everybody does, but a lot of people do. Look at what happens in churches. Look at when they have the speaking in tongues and the slaying in the spirit and all that kind of good shit. Sometimes it's real, sometimes it's fake, sometimes it's just the effect of peer pressure and all that kind of good shit. But what does it always entail? It almost always entails a long church service, like an hour-long church service, and everybody's been chanting and singing the whole time, and the pastor's been working you all up. Then he goes around, and your heart's pounding because he's gonna. It's happened to me. They touch you on the head, and you're gonna poof. You're gonna feel something, and if you don't, you're gonna fake it, right? And by seeing everybody faking it or feeling it around you, you're gonna be even more inclined to believe it's possible or to feel pressure to do it. So in the same vein, you're kind of entering an altered state at that moment. And sure enough, people who are truly believers, they're faith-filled believers, during those services will get hit, they'll fall down, they'll speak in tongues, and they'll have this vivid experience of touching God's toes, or some kind of weird shit will happen. And for them, it's completely real. And they were in an altered state at that point. I can probably, I bet you if I got a neurologist that I could talk to about this and be like, let's hook up, things to their heads and see what's going on, I'll bet you we'll see that they're in some sort of slight alteration of consciousness, maybe somewhere like, changing to some sort of maybe an alpha state or something, or maybe a high theta or something. They're entering some sort of a trance state, a transcendental sense. Well, okay, so that's a big piece of it. So entering into an altered state of consciousness is very important, which is why in my first book, Become the Maelstrom, which has sold pretty well, it's actually one of the main sources of my income are my books. So if you guys are interested, stop what you're doing, look down the description of this video. You'll see a link to my books on Amazon. Become the Maelstrom is my most recommended one, because if you're going to read my work, that's the one that's the Player's Handbook or Dungeon Master's Guide. That's got all the rules and all the basics, and it's the first edition. Eventually I'll do edition 2 and all that stuff. But this first edition is like the main, like if you want to understand all my other books and how to do everything, at least the way I present it, this is the book to use. Okay, so in that book, under the methodology section, the first things that I really start talking about as skills you need to have to be able to do magic correctly is altered states of consciousness. Before you even learn how to manipulate energy, before you do any of that crap, you need to begin to be able to change on command, on intent, the mental state of your mind. You need to be able to enter open state trances, which is basically daydreaming, focus state trances, which is like when you are concentrating so intently on one thing, it's all that's in your mind, and empty-minded states, which is kind of like the opposite. There's literally nothing going through your mind. In fact, that's the state of mind that I'm in, between 60 and 90% of the time on any waking day. There's no thoughts. And I know that sounds funny when people say, so Thorne, what was going through your head when you did that? Nothing. It's quite clearly, I literally have nothing going through my head most of the time. Instead, I have a full a full interface with the experience of being who I am in the moment most of the time. And occasional little blips will come through. I'll visualize something I want to do. I do have trouble visualizing, so when I do it right, it feels cool when I get it right. I'll have an auditory thought, like the subvocalization. I'll think, I need to go to the store today or something. And that's actually, you can tell that's kind of a distracted state for me. When I'm properly invested and invoked, when I'm properly in the correct state of mind, my thoughts flow, my words flow, my actions flow. There's no hesitation, there's no doubt. I simply act, and I act with sincerity and passion. And it's who I am. There's no thoughts getting in the way. The left and right hemispheres of my brain are perfectly synced. And I would probably say that most of the time I'm in what the gateway process that I talked about in my last video would call a focus 10 state, or very near it. Where my hemispheres are pretty well synced up. The left-hand side of my brain is not overly talking, and the right-hand side of my brain is not so passive. They're both balanced, and they're both taking the correct amount of steps in my everyday life. So these different altered states of consciousness, these different states of mental consciousness, however you arrive at them, either through dancing in this kind of trance work or meditation and learning to access them without chemicals and weird activities, however you achieve that, they're necessary. But for the experience of spiritual invocation, the absolute most important one is the open mind state. So let me before we get into why that's so important, let me talk about what's really going on. Hopefully I don't get too long-winded about non-duality or some other nonsense in here. So let's take this from a position of, you already know what I'm talking about when it comes to non-duality. Let's talk about this from the perspective of, you are trying to communicate with thought forms, with the egregoric mask, which is the avatar for archetypal consciousness. So in other words, the humanity has a collective conscious, but so does the universe. The universe as a whole has a collective consciousness. The universe as a whole is conscious. So there's 0, there's 1, 1, 2, 3, 5 in the Fibonacci sequence. And the 0 is, the ultimate. The 1 is the first emanation of the ultimate. The next one is the comparative. 2 is the combination. 3 is the trinity of self. The 4 is the illusion of time and space. 5 and so on. So when we're taking all this together, what we have to understand is the universe is conscious, and there is many different subdivisions in that consciousness. It's kind of like, imagine a person with alternate personalities. Imagine a person, they call it dissociative identity disorder. Imagine the universe is a vast consciousness that is also a collective of alternate personalities for that collective of consciousness. And each one of those, while it is part of the whole, is distinct because it is a segment of the infinite pattern. And that segment has a orderly pattern to it. And that segment can be accessed by beings that resonate with those ideas enough. Like, imagine there's an infinite possibility of ideas, but as a human being, you can only access those that are relevant to your resonance as experience would tell you. You can't imagine something that is unimaginable, right? So that would exist in the void of the Trinity of Self, for those of you who know what that is. Those are things that exist in the void, the thing that is unknowable to you. The things that are knowable within the astral realm are spiritual concepts. We call them archetypes. Now these archetypes can be very much, how would we say, not alive. They can be very dense, low vibrational. They can be like a brick. When you think of a brick, it's an archetype. We know what a brick is. It's a form. It's a platonic form, but it doesn't have a personality so much as it has this is what a brick is. However, in that collective consciousness, there are archetypes of consciousness that are identifiable. We identify, for example, the cosmic rebel, the adversary, the savior, the messiah, the father, the vengeful spirit, the jealous God. We identify these archetypes in the collective consciousness. And one way to think of it is almost like the branching of a tree. And there's a big trunk, which is the entirety of what is, and then there's little branches, so we're talking almost like a Kabbalistic view. And of course you have the inversion and all that stuff. But you have, just to keep it simple, you have like a tree diagram where you have the all, and then there's these big tree trunks that come out, and then they splinter off into little, smaller and smaller little things until at the very end you get like atoms and molecules, and you're actually somewhere up closer to the middle of what you're able to perceive. In fact, no matter where you are in the universe, you're always in the middle. That goes for scale as well. But anyway, you experience things as if, hey, if I look that way, it's almost like I am a product of this, right? Like I'm a product of my parents and things like that. So in the spiritual world, there is this idea that there are these archetypal conscious entities, and within them are millions, perhaps, of different aspects that will manifest as different entities, different things that you can interface with. This is almost a Jungian concept. So you've got your archetype of the cosmic rebel. Well, the cosmic rebel can have a whole bunch of different little, rays that come down off of it that are rebellious. They're the aspects of a cosmic rebel, the things a cosmic rebel might be about. And some of these are grouped again into even smaller consciousnesses. So you have, the cosmic rebel, which will manifest with certain archetypes, and different cultures will key in on those archetypes and say, well, that being in our culture represents that cosmic rebel. See, there is Enki, there is Ea, there is Neptune, Poseidon, Lucifer, Loki, whatever. Here's all these different ways it manifests in these different cultures. And sometimes it's pure, and sometimes it's a mixture of different archetypes. Sometimes you have the adversarial rebel, which is what happens when you get like a Satan mixed with a Lucifer type of concept. So what happens is human beings, being creator gods, being beings which are invoked archetypal experiences, no different from those things. In other words, you're an archetype. You may not realize it, but if you have someone get to know you well, you can have the kind of person you are identified as an archetype, at least in your relationship to each other. You can manifest as an archetype. So to a young child, I am like a sage archetype. To an old man, I'm an idiot kid. And this archetype kind of goes like Indra's web. Everybody's got a different reflection of each other, and in the space between is where that archetype takes place. So we conceptualize the archetype, and we create an egregoric mask, because as human embodied beings, we relate better to things that are personified. Our psychic core doesn't need this, but because we are embodied, because we are conscious beings in a living body, because that's what we're focusing our attention on, because we're focusing our awareness on being an embodied being, a lot of us require, in fact, pretty much everybody on some level, requires the personification of archetypal forces of nature in order for them to be interacted with in this magical way. So we create the egregore. We create an egregoric mask. Now, what's the difference between an egregore and an egregoric mask? Probably semantical more than anything. But an egregore is a spiritual being, which is an idea. It's a thought form that is believed in by enough people that it takes on a life and personality all its own, and eventually, if fed enough belief and power, can actually become a spiritual being that people can channel and access. It becomes real. And I would argue that most of pop culture characters, Superman, Spider-Man, Batman, all these kind of characters, all these different mans and womans in comic books, a lot of them are very old, and they're very befitting, actually, archetypes, ancient archetypes, and these are the new masks for those archetypes. And so you can have chaos magicians that can literally do a magic spell using Superman as the deity that they call upon, and weird crap will happen as if Superman did it for them. Not saying everybody does it that way, but I've seen plenty of people have success with that, and I've talked about that before. So what we're talking about then, when you're trying to do Invo/evocation, what you actually need to do is stop sitting in your ritual chamber waiting for something that doesn't have a physicality or a body or even a realistic realness to it to somehow reach out to you. It already did. If you're interested in working with a spirit, if you're inspired to say, you know what, I really want to work with Odin, I really want to work with Woden right now. I really want to do that. I really feel this strong call. And I'm wearing the Tri-Skull actually right now, because every year around this time I feel at least a little pull towards the Odinic stuff, even if not fully, just a little teeny bit. I'm feeling this inspiration and this pull towards this thing. I'm going to do some magic for it, or I'm going to start celebrating it in my rituals. I'm going to make some offerings to it. I'm going to ask it for something, whatever it is it's going to be that you're going to do. Well, that's already the spirit working in you. That's already that archetype, because that archetype has gotten your attention, and that attention goes both ways. In the space between you forms this archetype, this egregore. You look at the concept of Woden, for example, and you go, well, let's see, this is kind of like an interesting kind of teacher, kind of like like a hard, he's a father, but he's like crafty, and he sees deeply into the mysteries, and well, I'd love to work with this being because he can teach me a lot. And these archetypal ideas, whether they're what everybody agrees upon, so your idea of Odin could be different from your neighbors, but you will see a mask that you're kind of creating. And you create this mask for this archetype, and if you get that mask in resonance properly with the being that you're trying to associate with, and again, the being being the archetypal consciousness that you're trying to reach, if you get that mask to resonate properly, if you tune it in just right, with the right symbolism, and the symbolism has to speak to you. And the symbolism doesn't have to speak to you on the left-hand side, it's got to speak to your right-hand brain. It's got to speak to your submissive, your subconscious mind, more than so a lot of times people will get too thoughtful, and they'll be like, well, then the spirit should look like this because he's he's identified by these things, so therefore, the spirit of death must have a side. He must. Not necessarily, not necessarily at all. It's what your subconscious needs it to be. That's what's important, not what your rationalized side says. Although they should be in agreement, because remember, the left and right hemisphere should be synchronized so that they're not fighting over what's real and what's not. They need to be, again, you need to enter that open state, that empty state, that full state where you can synchronize the hemispheres into one experience, and they're working together, not in opposition to each other. So again, no matter what the form is, you've got to dial it in so it matches the archetypal consciousness, but then also your own resonant need, what you resonate with. And when you do that correctly, you'll feel inspired. And that is you're already in communication. You're already having contact. In fact, the fact that you want to do a ritual by itself, especially if you're feeling really drawn to it, I feel really drawn to working with Woden, that is already the communication. You just don't realize it. You're tuning it in and you're getting the signal. That's already the first part. So why do I say the open mind state is so important? Well, the open mind state is the daydreaming state. And if you're doing it in a proper trance state, if you're in the open mind state, but you're having that synchronized hemispherical activity going on, so you're not just going, I wonder what Odin would look like. No, you're in that like drool coming out of your mouth type of daydream. Like we've all been in that 1,000-yard stare. I think you all have. I hope you have, because that's like a prerequisite. We've all had that 1,000-yard stare daydream moment in our lives. Sometimes like we're at work and we're tired and you're having a cigarette or something, you're just kind of staring like this. That's the 1,000-yard stare that I'm talking about. And when you're in that state, you're imagining things, you're experiencing things, you're remembering you're arguing with your boss, you're thinking about your girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever it is that's on your mind, and you're having that daydream, okay? That is the open state, quite literally. When used in Magick, the open state isn't just anything, it's sort of guided. So you begin the open state with your imagination. Now, the open state is a key, because the open state is when you're allowing your imagination to become either fully or partially an overlay for your physical awareness. And basically, you're dreaming while you're awake, and you're allowing your mind's eye either vividly, like you literally see and imagine things around you, or you just, at least in your head, you see and imagine things, or at least contemplate them. So what's really happening here is your third eye, your chakra, your ajna chakra, whatever you want to call it. Your crown is receiving the spiritual communication, and your third eye is resonating with it. And that's what's like translating it for you. And your third eye translates it for your entire being. It makes it part of your entire being. it tunes it in for you. It makes it clear. It's like instead of just static on a screen, it makes it something you can understand. So this third eye, when it's active and it's working properly, your imagination isn't just willy-nilly imaginary things, although it will begin that way. Your imagination is influenced and inspired by spiritual messages, because what you imagine in your mind's eye is the material side of the veil of spiritual work. So I did this demonstration for somebody the other day in a consultation where I said, imagine this is the spirit world, and the spirit world is on this side of this veil, and this is my conscious mind, this is my imagination. And if I'm observing the veil, if I'm observing the spirit world, I might notice, hey, there's something here, there's something on the other side, and it's having an effect on the veil. If I press my awareness to that veil and I feel, then I can become fully aware, as if the hands are touching. I can become fully aware of what's on the other side. But my experience will always be on this side of the veil. It will always be on the material side of the veil. I will always experience the spirit world in a way that is my own mind's eye creation. Now, to get that going, though, some people say, well, okay, I get that. I understand that, Thorne, and I enter the open-minded state, and I start daydreaming, about, like, my job or something. I go, okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes the message is something to do with your job, actually. But let's say you want to have a little bit more like a Hollywood-style experience. You want to feel like you're literally in the presence of a spirit and talking to the spirit and having that. Then the most important thing that you need to do during the course of your ritual, the whole point of all of this is to put you in the magical state of mind, the subconscious state of magic, where it is real and valid and rational for you to start experiencing weird visions and shit. So you set up your ritual, you get into it, you get to the part where you're calling the spirit, and instead of just sitting here, all right, where are you, waiting, start pretending it's there with you. Start imagining, intentionally create whatever it is that you need. It can be as simple as maybe like you have something like this on your wall and you see this like spiral open and become a gateway, and a hand penetrates through and it tears its way through, and there's a demon standing there staring you in the face. Maybe it's you're calling the spirit, your eyes are closed, and you imagine that it's suddenly standing over your shoulder and it's breathing down your neck. Maybe you imagine that your entire temple fades away, your physical world, your living room, your bedroom, your bathroom, wherever you're doing your ritual, fades away, and now you're in a big empty blackness, and there's like some pillars or something, and whatever your idea is, you imagine this space, and you imagine walking up to a throne, and there's the spirit sitting there, and you can talk to it. Whatever you want to do, set up this role play in your mind. And when you're doing it, don't doubt it. Don't worry about it being real or not. Literally just let it happen. Literally just pretend that you're having the conversation with the spirit that you wish you were having, and play both sides of that conversation. Do it if that's what it takes. If in other words, if you're working with Lucifer and you say, you imagine Lucifer there, and Lucifer appears in front of you, and you go, Lucifer, what do I need to do right now? Whatever your first impulse that you think Lucifer would say back to you, whatever you think he would say, have him say it. Even if it doesn't sound like, even if you're not sure that's what he would say, just, does that sound like something Lucifer would say? If so, run with it and just engage that conversation back and forth. If you're new, it's going to feel fake. It's going to feel like you're pretending. It's going to feel weird. And then when you're done with the ritual, close the ritual, say thank you, grab your journal, write the whole experience out, at least the cliff notes, write your basic understanding of what happened out, and come back to it later, and then look at it and say, how accurate was it? Which things were right? Which things were just like weird symbolic things? Because sometimes things are right, but in a symbolic way. You might have, like, the spirit might say, you must sacrifice your right hand in order to get the thing that you want. You're like, well, fuck, I ain't cutting my right hand off. That'll fucking suck. I don't want that so much. But then next thing you know, your best friend turns his back on you, and you have to stop being their friend to get the promotion you wanted because they cheated you, and you had to literally cut off your right hand man. Symbolically, that prediction was 100% accurate, but because it's in code, of subconscious code, it's not always available to you in a rational, logical sense. So you have to keep notes, you have to pay attention to what's going on, and you really have to allow it to be imaginary and run with it. And it may be something that feels really inaccurate for a while. It may feel like something you're doing wrong for a long time. But you'll notice that, maybe it's 5% this week. Next week it'll be 20%. And maybe you'll stay at 20% for a long time. And when I say 5%, I mean that's the accuracy. You might only get 5% accuracy, then 20% accuracy, then 50, 60, 70. Then you'll do a ritual and you'll be like, Lucifer, or let's pick a spirit that's better. King Vinay, I've got this enemy at work and he's really undermining me and he's poisoning the ear of my boss. I need you to destroy them for me. And Vinay will accept the task, and you'll make your offering to them, and be honest with yourself. Don't just have so one of the pitfalls people run into with this, especially in the beginning, is they can't necessarily differentiate between their hopeful desire, their wishful thinking, and an actual response from the spirit. And this is one of the reasons why there are times I won't touch it, because I feel I'm too attached to the outcome. And when I feel I'm too attached to the outcome, it's not as easy for me to be honest about whether it was me that was just doing something like, King Paimon, I really want to be rich. I really want to have money for something. I'm really poor right now. And then suddenly I'll get this vision of like me rolling around in money like Scrooge McDuck, and I'll go, now wait a minute. That might just be my wishful thinking, maybe that's an exaggeration there, that and then I'll start second guessing myself. And if you're feeling that second guessing feeling, don't worry about it. Shut it down. Pretend that, and just know that was probably not the spirit. If you're second guessing it, even if it was the spirit, if you're second guessing it, the communication is just garbled, and just don't rely on it. You can write it down, but make a note, like, I was feeling, conflicted here. And pay attention to that specifically. That's the only way you're going to learn the difference, to be honest with you. And I actually had one friend of mine who had an experience like that, and they were, talking to the spirit, and they were able to identify pretty easily, or at least, it was kind of like a breakthrough for them when they realized, hey, this was just me being having wishful thinking, and thinking that it was okay when it really wasn't, and they had to like reboot a process they were doing. So you need to run with your imagination. You need to let your imagination run away with you, because in the ancient forms of what we're talking about, when people are using the trance work, when they're doing all the dancing and the fasting and the entheogenic compounds and psychedelics and all that good shit, well, they're imagining things, but then those things take on terrifying dimension because their minds are altered. They're reaching a point where it's, another way to think of it is kind of like if you're going to bed, and your mind, like, let's say you've been playing a certain video game all day, and it's happened to me where I've played a certain video game all day. I don't know what video game, but some video game I'll be playing all day, and I'll dream about the video game, and I'll be like, son of a bitch, like, this isn't a spiritual dream, I'm just dreaming about a video game, this sucks. Or, whatever it might be, like, I'll be dreaming about a video game. Or in the context of a video game, like, I'll be walking around my normal life, but there'll be, like, hit bars over everything. And it's like, So it's kind of like that. If you go into this trance state with the right intention, with the right stuff on your mind, it will influence the things that you experience. So if someone spends a week in isolation, fasting, and they're praying constantly, and they're doing all the things that a ritual, like some of the old school rituals, require, and they're really preparing, and oh man, this is woof, and they're really preparing for it, and then they do this wild ritual with dancing and chanting and entheogenics and psychedelics, well, they're probably going to have a good chance they're going to have a mental experience, a vivid experience that is exactly in the direction that they're hoping it will be like. And it may be different. They may not be able to predict what it'll be, but if you're trying to see fairies and ghosts, you're going to see fairies and ghosts. You know what I mean? If you go to an ayahuasca drinking ceremony, you're probably going to see Mother Eye, because that's what you've been to, Mother Eye, because you've filled your head with that belief. Very good probability that that's what you're going to experience. Does that mean Mother Aya didn't show up to you, or that she did? Well, I've never taken it, so I can only speculate, but I would suggest, pardon the train, sorry, Mother Aya. I would suggest that more than likely that is a realistic representation of that being, because you felt called to do so. So that archetype probably did influence you to be inspired to do this, and so therefore that experience is valid, most likely. So one of the other tips I would give you is anybody, I did this with a consult the other night. They're like, no matter what I do, I just can't, I can't feel the spirit. I don't know how to do it. I can't get them to fill my mind. And I said, think about one of your grandfathers. He's like, which one? Anyone. Just think of one of your grandfathers. You got them in their head? What do you think that they would say about your magical practices right now? And they thought for a second, and they acted out their grandfather. They literally took on their mannerisms and voice and said, well, grandson, you really shouldn't be doing this magic stuff because it's of the devil and it's bad. And it did a voice inflection and everything. And I kind of smiled and I said, you do realize you just did a very low-level version of necromancy just now, right? That is quite literally what spiritual communion is, except when you get good at it, it's not just you remember them and role play them. The line between your role play and the actual being becomes so thin and spread out, if that makes sense. You can't tell where one of you begins and one of you ends. You start to merge so that your memory of the person quite literally could be that person's soul influencing you to communicate and imagine these things. So this is something everyone can do. After you get done with watching this video, you can invoke at least an egregore of me. You can have a thought of me and act like me and do that. And in a very realistic way, you are basically invoking the equivalent of my egregore that I have sort of helped you manifest. Because here's the big secret, okay? None of these things exist external to us. They are all within our own collective consciousness. And we create for not just the spirits, but for each other, egregores. Everybody you've ever met, you don't see them for how they truly are. You see a mask that the two of you have cooperatively created for each other. When you're talking to me, whether it be on a consult or in person, and I'm interacting with you, my subjective world and your subjective world are bleeding over with each other because they're really the same consciousness, but they're bleeding over and influencing each other's experiences a little bit. The things that I say are received by you, but then you interpret those things. And sort of like two waves of energy colliding, somewhere in the middle, they'll waver back and forth, which one has control over it. But somewhere in the middle, this vision of what we are appears. Somewhere between you and I, an egregore of who I am manifests, and you experience that egregore. I don't experience that egregore because that's the mask of me that you're experiencing. You've created an ego mask for me, and that is what you're talking to. That ego mask is like basically what I'm wearing so that I'm not subjected directly to your subjective reality. I still maintain my own subjective sphere. It's like two bubbles coming together, changing the shape of each other. And when those two bubbles come together and they usually form like a flat shape between them, it's kind of like I said before, when you have this going on and you're touching each other, but you're never actually really in contact because there's always a contextual difference. So between you and I, there's an egregore that you can invoke anytime you want. And it is theoretically possible for me to maintain a connection to that egregore even without having, say, physical or mechanical or technological connection to it, though that is much more difficult because once you've released the exchange in the material, because most of our minds are invested in the material world, because our minds are almost entirely focused on the material as invoked beings, when we don't have that material connection, it's a lot harder for us to get accurate readings of each other. We need this medium for the communication to happen. We are not tuned in. Nobody is well enough, at least as far as I know, to have the depth of communication we can have in the material realm. However, we can have spiritual communication at a distance. I've done things where, I will mentally contact someone that I know is sensitive and be like, call me, or be receptive to my text or something. And sure enough, it'll be like instant, they'll call me, or within a short amount of time. Or I text them and they'll go, I was just thinking about you. Is it mechanical? Is it a science? No. But does it happen? Yes. So all I'm telling you is when you're working with spiritual forces, when you're working with invocation / evocation, at least for the invocation side, at least for the communication side of it, where you're trying to see the spirit and talk to it, you need to create that imaginary friend and talk to that imaginary friend with the faith that that imaginary friend is real. Now, for the evocation side of things, that's when all the magical ritual stuff comes in. That's when you need to start watching your candle flames, your incense, your environment, if you're in the woods listening for things walking around and all kinds of stuff. That's when you need to pay attention to those things. But if all you're doing is lighting a candle and saying a prayer to the spirit and trying to get in touch with it, all you're really looking for is that internal imaginary friend to make sense. That's all you're looking for. So, to summarize, do not sit in a magical ritual after doing the ritual and just, where are you? Because that's not going to do anything. Well, most of the time it's not going to do anything. Sometimes you get lucky. Most of the time, nothing's going to happen and it's going to be a waste of your time. You need to go with the imagination. And if you're unable to imagine, ask yourself why. If you're unable to commit to that experience, if you say Thorne, then that means I'm making it up. Or if you say Thorne, my imagination's not that good. Or you say Thorne, I'm really distracted by the problem. Then that's what you need to work on. That, not the ritual, not the spells, not getting the information right, not saying the spell right, not getting the incense right. None of that bullshit matters. You need to get that blockage out first. You need to remove that blockage in your mind. It's kind of like when a Christian will say you have to have faith. Now, I don't believe in faith. That's not how I work. But they will say you need to have faith. And in that sense, maybe they got a point. To do what I'm doing, I need to have faith that my imagination is at least valid. It's at least something worth writing down in a journal. And that's all you need. You just need to have the belief that for the duration of this ritual ceremony, my imagination is going to be treated as if it's real. And I'm going to write it down as if it was real, and then I'm going to validate it later using whatever methods feel comfortable for you. Alright guys, hopefully this video was helpful for you. If you found this useful, if you like my content, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Make sure that you share this everywhere that you can, where I'm not going to get in trouble. I don't need a whole bunch of nasty Christians or something coming after me. But regular Christians are fine. If you are a Christian and you believe in Yahweh and Jehovah and all these other different things, and that's the deities that you work with, and you find value in what I have to say, so long as you maintain an open mind, and you don't think I'm going straight to hell, you're welcome to stick around and be cool. For everybody who does like my work, if you want to support it, go down into the description. There's a lot of links to a lot of ways you can help me out. There's my books, there's my Patreon, there's my Teespring, and some Etsy stuff that is now going up. My wife and I have been, we had an Etsy store just open this past Thursday, and it sold out within minutes, which was amazing. It's basically Christmas money. It's coming in for family and stuff, so that's really cool. I really appreciate that from you guys, and more stuff will be coming out in time for the holidays. So if there's nothing there when you go to the Etsy store right now, favorite it, and make sure you come back later and just keep checking on it, because we will be adding new products again very soon. Probably a bunch more books. I'm probably going to be doing some necklaces and pendants and things that hopefully will be of interest to you guys. Alright guys, well that's it for this video. Until next time, mind the shadows.